So by now you guys should have set up your files. You guys want to be working with two separate files, okay, not on one file. And then at the end, we will throw each of those onto a template. I'm just going to go ahead real quickly, just go over setting up the self-portrait. So for the self-portrait, we're going to do this print-based. Okay, so that means our color mode, or sorry, I'm having a loss of words. The digital color that we are working with is CMYK. So I just clicked on print here in the new document window, and then right here in color mode it should read CMYK. Remember, CMYK is the universal color for print, along with spot colors. And then I'm just going to go ahead and change this to inches. It's a little easier to understand. The width for our self-portrait is going to be 7 inches. And I think the height is 9 1/4 or 9.25. And that's about it. That's all we need to do. We can leave the raster effects the way they are. Everything else can just be left the way it is. Only one artboard. So the other thing I'll just quickly remind you is you guys want to make sure that you are placing an image. Okay, so file and place, place to trace. And for this demo, I'm using this photo. This is not a student. This is a girl from Japan. And if you guys recall, you can take your image, drop the opacity on those. Okay, the important part here is I want to make sure that this is on its own layer, and that I am locking that layer and then drawing on top of it. Okay, so I've already prepared some vector work that's already been done. So I've already started drawing a lot of the vector lines that I want to use as the basis for my line work. So when you're in this stage, you don't want to pay too much attention to line profiles, brushes. You don't want to get too caught up in the aesthetics too quickly. You're just trying to get as many lines as you think you'll need. I would say go err on the side of more than less. But at some point you'll get to a stage where you need to start editing your vector lines or your vector points. So what it is probably a real good idea to do is, after you're done doing most of this vector work, is to create a new layer. So now we have 3 layers. And then what I'm going to do is select all of these vector lines. And after I do that, in the layers panel, we have this little square symbol here. Okay, this represents the objects that I've selected in that layer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down on Option or Alt, and I'm going to click and drag those up into layer 3. So I just made a copy of all of those vectors, and this will be like my reserve. Okay, when I mess up on something and I need those lines again, I can always go back to this layer. So I'll just name it vectors. You could name it something else. But I'll lock those and turn off the visibility. And then on layer 3, I'll just name those line. So this should look really similar to what we were doing in exercise 4 with line and color. When I created these lines, I intentionally had lines overlap each other. And I would suggest you guys work in the same way because it's a lot easier to have these lines overlap and then come in and just cut off the ends here. So that means you get a nice termination between where this line starts and the edge of this line. What I find students do is they'll spend an inordinate amount of time trying to line up things with other lines, or trying to be really careful around intersections. And what I would say is a better strategy while you're working is just let those lines overlap. And then when you're ready to start editing those, what I do is I select the line with the black arrow, grab the scissors tool, and if you're working with your smart guides, so view and smart guides, those are turned on. As I hover right in between those two lines, I get a little purple indicator letting me know that there's an intersection. I'll just click once and it cuts it right at that intersection. Okay, and I can be assured, okay, that those meet perfectly. And so that's what I do at this phase, is I go around and I just start just chopping up these lines and getting those closer to a finished state. And I'll kind of move back and forth between using the white arrow and the black arrow. You can use the white arrow, you just got to be careful. If you click on a point using the white arrow, you're actually telling the computer to just focus on that particular anchor point. But if you click on the actual segment, so there's no point here, if I click on the segment, I'm telling the computer to focus on the line. And so that way when I start using this tool, it's going to work almost identical to the black arrow tool. So I'm not going to do every single intersection that needs to be dealt with, but you guys have a good idea of what this process should look like. And you want to make sure you spend time doing that. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to start adding a lot of customization to this line work. And you guys already have some tools and tricks for doing that. So for instance, this vector line right here, okay, this is the top part of her eyelid. It also coincides with her eyelashes. If you guys remember, going into the stroke panel, and if you guys open the stroke panel and you don't see all of these options, just click on the hamburger menu here and go to show options. And at the bottom of the stroke panel, if you guys remember, we have this thing called profiles. And I can change the profiles, and I can thicken up the weight of the stroke, and I can get these nice curves, these nice styles of line that I can work with. So that's one method. Okay, just going through, selecting your vector points, choosing a profile, and then adjusting the line weight. The other thing you can do, so for instance, on this part right here, she has an eyebrow. Okay, there's a lot of texture on the end of this that I might want to work with. And so what I could do instead of working on profiles is work with the brushes panel. So remember, you can always find those up here in window and brushes. Okay, I'm just going to use it right here. And I went ahead and I grabbed a few brushes from my library. So remember, right here we have the brush libraries menu icon. And the ones that I've been using throughout our projects are these artistic brushes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose this one here, chalk round. There we go. And this I think could work well. Maybe I'll look at this one too. This one could work as well, but I'm going to stick with this one, this chalk round. And I don't have to be stuck with using it just in this format. I could go back to the stroke panel and I could choose a profile for that brush. So I'll choose this one, this stroke profile 5, I think it is. And then I like how it's tapering, but I don't like the direction that it's tapering. So right next to the profile option, okay, you have these two icons, flip. And so I'm going to flip it along this, I guess it would be a vertical axis so that it runs this way. Okay, and so I like this a little bit better. I can also change the stroke weight. You don't have to settle for these increments that it gives you. So let's say I don't want it to be 1 pixel. I want it to be 0.8 pixels. Okay, I can input that in there, and that way I don't have to go straight down to like half a pixel or a quarter pixel. I can customize this. I think it goes up to 3 decimal points away from the dot or the period. So you can get really customized with that. The other thing, so in this particular demo, I played around with lines that I don't want to stand out a lot, lines that I want to be very faint, but they kind of follow the contours of the face. And so for this, I found a brush in here that's really thin, an art brush. And I was using this, actually it's this one, hand-drawn line. Okay, I was using this to get these nice, fine, kind of stylistic lines that run across the figure's face. And so I think I had done it with these. And these ones down here. Okay, and that way I'm getting these subtle indications of a change in the plane or a change in the direction of light. Again, this is like a stylistic choice that I've been making. The other thing that you want to keep in mind while you're working with these is you want to give priority to line weight. It's usually with a rendering like this, where we're being more representational, we want to give a sense of depth. And we want to do that through color, because color is very helpful. But we can also do that through working with line. And so some things to keep in mind with line weight. Let me move this around. In particular, on something like a face. Okay, and this can work for a lot of different objects. But there's a priority of thickness. So some of the thickest lines should be at the bottom of an object or some kind of protruding part of a face. So in this case, the chin. it protrudes out and it's the bottom side of, in this case, the head. So this would get a pretty thick line. Obviously, the profile, okay, or what you would see if this was all a big shadow shape or a silhouette, that profile line would be the next thickest line. Okay, so the outside perimeter of an object. Then you have these things called overhangs and projections. Okay, so this would be things like the nose or the bottom of the ear, or even the bottom, or in this case it would be the top side of the eyelid, because if you think about it, the top side of the eyelid is a projection over your eyeball. Okay, so it's actually hanging over the top side of your eyeball. And if you think in terms of lighting, if light were to come down onto this object, it would be casting a slight shadow from the top of your eyelid down onto your eyeball. And so in order to represent this accurately with line, you would make that line thicker than this one here on the bottom. And then you start creating depth with just simple lines. And then we get all the way to the thinnest lines, which are just small details that you would see. So maybe some people have a line here showing the change in direction on their skull from the forehead to the temple. I would say this detail here, the bottom of the eyelid, it's also receiving a lot of light, so it wouldn't be casting a lot of a shadow. The edge here of your nostril. Where else would you find a detail line? Any kind of, folds or creases on the face. If there's a wrinkle for a smile, those would not be treated with the same line thickness as, let's say, the bottom line of the jaw. So as I'm working, I'm looking to create those priority of lines and line weights to start creating depth. So I know in this line here, this is going to be a thicker line, but I don't want it to be thick all the way to the edges. So I'll choose something like this, profile 3, so that it tapers as it comes close to this part of her ear. And so this is going to be really helpful in just giving a really compelling image. So what I wanted to also get into was creating these line blends right here. Okay, this is optional, but this gives a lot of personality to line work. And what it does is it kind of mimics, if you guys have ever read comic books or graphic novels, a lot of the style for it's actually creating a sense of value using line. So values like the lightness or darkness that's inherent in an object or anything else that you draw. And with line, I mean, it's not like value where you can blend it like a nice gradient. Okay, it's not like a nice smooth color like paint. Lines are definite. They're definitive marks. And so a blend actually gives the illusion of value without being such a strong element. Okay, so these are being treated like detail lines, but they're in a series of parallel lines. They're tapering down. And as I zoom out from this and look at it, and a lot of times I squint my eyes when I'm looking at it, I get the sense that there's this form of a cheek or a cheekbone right there. And so that's another great thing to utilize while you're making these lines. So I could give that a try up here on the figure's eyelashes. So this is in your exercise 4 activity. but I'll just show you really quickly how you would do something like this. So I'm going to draw a line first, and I'll give it a little bit of a bend, and I'll apply the profile right now. Okay, I don't want to do this later on. You want to do it early on. So this is pretty good. Maybe it doesn't exactly match what I'm seeing in the photo, but it's pretty close. So now that I have one side, I'm actually going to copy this to the other side. And don't start to mess with the size just yet. This is part of one of the errors in working in Illustrator. When you work with this tool, if you start modifying this other copy too early, the blend doesn't work. It runs into calculation errors, and I don't know why. So when you do this, what you want to do is just make a copy of that line. Just move it over to the other side. Don't worry about its size or its width just yet. And then I'm going to come over here to the blend tool, and I'm going to blend between these two lines. Okay, so I get something like this. After I'm done with that, now I can come in here, and I'm using the white arrow tool, and I know that this eyelash on this side is smaller, maybe because it's also foreshortened. Okay, maybe it's kind of sticking out, and so it looks as though it's smaller. Okay, but that's closer to what I want. The other thing is there's not enough eyelashes here. So once you've created the blend, all you need to do is click on it, and it should be like a group. And if I double click on the blend tool, I can move into these other options here. So in this case, I'm going to move to this one, specified steps. Okay, and I could say, instead of just 4 steps in between these two, let's try 12. And we can preview that. Okay, and so now it looks denser. You can also do this one too, specify distance. Okay, you can say, what do you want the distance between each one of those series of lines to be? Okay, and right now it's giving us 0.05. We could do more. We could say 0.06. If I click and unclick the preview, okay, it starts to give a little more space. Let's try 0.2 and see what that looks like. Okay, so that's more space. I'm going to go ahead and go with just the specified steps. I'll stick with 12 and click OK. Okay, the last thing I would do is I need to change it so that the blend follows a curved line instead of a straight line. So in order to do that, with the blend already created, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to start drawing a path where I want the blend to go. So in this case, I want the blend to start here, move up, and then down on this path. Okay, so I created what's called a spine. I want this to be the spine. So now that I've created the spine, I'm going to select it with the black arrow, and then I'm going to hold down on Shift and select the blend that I made. Okay, so now that I have those selected, I'm going to come up to Object. I'm going to go down to Blend. And then you have an option right here. It's called Replace Spine. Okay, I'm going to select that option, see what it gives me. So this is looking pretty good. It did a pretty good job from here to here, but right about here, okay, there's some issues. So to fix that, I'm going to come back with the white arrow tool, and I'm going to start just moving these points on this last path that I made. Okay, and as I move that part, these parts are going to start moving too. If I move the white arrow right here and then select, I can actually start to modify the spine. Okay, so maybe for those of you who have used Illustrator before, okay, this is something that I think you should explore to challenge yourself more. Work with some blends. Try to work with getting these customized spines on the blend. Let me try one more up over here. And again, just holler out if you have any questions. I'm going to start the same way. I'm going to create a path right here. And I want to make sure I'm working with black. And what I want to do is I want to mimic this texture on her beanie or her hat as it rolls across the top. And so I've created one line. I'm going to go ahead and change the profile. And this is a detail, so I don't want it to be a thick line. And now that I have that, I'm going to go ahead and just copy it, and I'll just bring it down over here. And you got to be patient, okay? Because if you start modifying these things too early, the computer has issues. So I'm going to create the blend from here to here. And I'll just go ahead at this point and create the spine. So I've created the blend. Now I'll create the spine. When you create these spines, try not to work with too many points. I would say no more than 3 points. Otherwise, you'll get some awkward transitions on the blends. Okay, so you want some smooth paths on here. I'm trying to move this to get a little bit more of this curve. Okay, so I can always edit this, but I'll just start with this spine. I'm going to select the blend. I'll hold down on Shift, and then I'll select the spine too. I'll go to Object, Blend, and I'll go to here, Replace Spine. Okay, it did an okay job. I'm going to go ahead and double click on the blend, and I want to get more steps in between. So let's try double that. Let's try 24. I'll click OK. And now it's all about massaging those lines into place. So as I move these lines on the end, watch this one over here. This is a cool effect. Look at this transition. It's moving from a curve that points to the right, but as it goes across the form, it starts to turn around and it starts pointing to the left. Okay, this is a really cool option that you have with these blends. I'll click on the spine. I can see that some of these are the spine's too high on this beanie, so I'll start nudging these down. I'm using the arrow tool to nudge this part down. And you gotta just gotta be aware of what you're clicking as you do this. Okay, this can get a little frustrating if you don't know which points that you're clicking. the final thing I want to show you when you work with a blend like this is, let's say you get really close to something that you want, but there's still like some errors up here with the blend. You might get to a point where you actually need to turn this from being an effect into being individual objects. So in order to do that, if I select the blend with the black arrow, not the white, and then I come up here to Object, I'm going to go to this option here, Expand Appearance. And this will happen sometimes too. It looks like I got a little bit of an issue here with this part of the blend. I'm going to go back and modify that later, but here's what I wanted to show you. As you expand it, it's going to actually, you have to do this twice from what I can recall. So I expand appearance and then I go to here, expand, and then you're going to expand both the object and the fill, click OK. And what I can do now is I can come in here and I can modify these points. Okay, and I can pull those down. If I wanted to, I could come in to the properties and I could just delete those points here on top. And so I could get rid of these extra parts that I don't need as part of the blend. So that could happen on things like this blend here. Okay, I might want to expand that. There's another way you can expand these too. Sorry, I'm trying to get rid of the zoom preview here. If I go to Object, I believe you can do this one too. Object Path. No, I don't want to do that one. Forgive me, there's an option here I'm trying to remember where it gives me a series of stroked lines that I can modify. Not really understanding why it's not showing that option. It should just be through expand. Maybe this one? There we go. Okay. So it looks like some things might have changed in Illustrator. The other thing I can do is if you go to Object, Blend, and then there's an option here to expand the blend from here. Okay, this will also change those into individual objects. So if I were to right-click and go to Ungroup, these are now just individual strokes that I can modify. So maybe I decide that I don't need this one and this one. Before, when I was working, that was all one object, and I could not modify those individual parts. There's one more thing I wanted to show you guys before I wrap this up. I can also do this. I can create a line, and if you guys have been working in the or looking into the learning resources, we have a really awesome tool right here. It's called the width tool. So let me show you what this does. If I come up to a point and hover over that with the width tool, or if I come up to a line, it's going to give me a little marker that scrolls along the stroke. If I click and drag, okay, I can make this part of the stroke wide. And if I come over here like to this endpoint, I can actually pull this in so it's a nice tapered line. And so I can actually make a super customized stroke profile. So if I were to come in here, I could actually start working with this tool, the width tool, over here on these strokes. Maybe I could say this stroke, I want to be very thick here. I want it to be thin here. And maybe for some reason I want it to be a little bit thicker here, but thinner here. Okay. We couldn't really do this if we were just using the stroke profiles. Okay, there's not a custom option for this yet. If I were to take this custom profile that I made, and let's say I want the stroke to be really narrow. Okay, maybe I want this to read at just 1 point. And just for fun, I'm going to make this part a little bit thicker, this part thinner. Just get a little bit more variation. Okay, so let's say I make a custom stroke that looks like this. I can select this, and if I open my brushes panel, all I have to do is click and drag this into the brushes panel, and I get a little plus icon. Okay, it's going to ask if I want to turn this into a brush. Okay, there's many types of brushes. We're not going to get into this today, but I'm going to create an art brush. I'll click OK. There's many options you can change for this brush. I'm just going to keep it all at the default settings and click OK. And now I can use this in a couple ways. I can select lines, just like we did before, and I can apply that custom stroke that I came up with, or that custom profile. The other thing I can do is I can grab this, the paintbrush tool, and that's selected in my brush panel. I have that brush that I made, and this works like the pencil tool. If I double click, I can change the fidelity, but I can actually just start drawing with this tool. And this way I actually don't need to come in here and start selecting those individual lines. I can just draw in real time using that custom brush that I made. Okay, so you might want to experiment with that as you're working. So as you're working and you're working in line, also consider that line can also encompass a lot of shadow shapes. Okay, so you don't need to just limit yourself to just making these outlines of features. So in this case, I started to explore creating these large shadow shapes, okay, that work alongside these blends that I made. Okay, some of them I think are coming out pretty well. So like in here in the eyebrows, maybe I would need to come in here and use a custom brush to get some of these other effects. Some of these are too huge. Okay, so here you can see I actually made quite a big variety of custom brushes. Okay, so I made like 10 custom brushes to where just using my brush tool, I can come in here and start adding these final details. So I haven't even gotten into using color, but you guys already have a roadmap for how you guys would do that. It's in exercise 4. When I'm working in color, again, feel free. You can take these brushes, you can actually choose different colors, and you can start working with them. Okay, and you can actually get those colors, at least not on that one, but you can start getting those colors in the brushes. So if you have maybe things like hair, where you want a highlight going across, and you don't want to draw that with the pen tool, you would rather just use some stroked lines. This is where you want to think about either using a brush or just coloring those stroked lines.